You know, there's that old saying that one bad apple ruins the whole bushel. And that saying is so old and so well known because it is so true. Greetings, welcome back to the Old Ways Rising Farm YouTube channel, and today we're going to talk about how to properly pack produce, root crops, vegetables, all this stuff for the root cellar in such a way that mitigates the reality of that saying. Okay, so what happens when you have something in the root cellar? This is a living thing. And there's a lot of things that can be root cellared. All of the root crops obviously are root cellared on a regular basis. There are apples that root cellar really well. Typically, the more tart and the lower the sugar content, the better it root cellars when ripe. But even some of the sugarier sweet apples can root cellar reasonably well if you pick them a little off ripe and then let them ripen while they're in storage. There are even tomatoes that were bred to be root cellared. You would pick them green and they would ripen in storage again, but there are root cellar tomato varieties. Okay? So there's a lot of things that you can root cellar that people don't normally think of as root cellar fruits and vegetables. Okay? So we're not going to go over everything that can and can't be root cellar. We're going to talk about a general strategy for how to pack it. And since this is a living thing, it has, you know, the cells in here are still doing their normal cell stuff. Hi, Kitty. We've got a friend for this video. Are still doing their normal cell stuff and trying to protect themselves from rot and disease. Okay? This will continue in this form as long as it is somewhat moist. If it dries down too much and over desiccates, then the cells start to die and it becomes prone to rot. If something bruises it and destroys some of those cells, kills some of those cells, then rot can establish in there and it will start to rot. And once you have that rot established, it will begin to have such a high concentration of bacteria, dead bacteria and bacteria waste products, that those waste products and dead bacteria start to kill adjacent cells so the rot works its way through. Now the same thing happens if this one starts to rot and it sits up on top of another one. The ooze juice from the rotting potato will work its way down and start to kill the potato underneath it, which then rots and produces its own ooze juice, which then kills the next one down. And this is why one bad apple ruins the whole bushel. So when we're packing this stuff, we need to do three things. We need to protect them from bruising. We need to protect the ooze juice from one that does rot from getting on adjacent fruit or vegetables, and we need to manage the moisture content. So I'm going to readjust the camera so you can see a little more specifically what I'm doing, and I'll show you how we accomplish all these three things at once. Now, the first thing we have to be careful of is that we don't get anything that's pre-sick or pre-damaged. One of the problems we've had this year is late blight, both in the potatoes and tomatoes. We're far enough north, this is not usually a problem, but some years it comes up, and when we have really wet summers in the hot part of the summer, it'll come up from the south, and it gets into everything. It's worse on the tomatoes than the potatoes, but it's still bad on the potatoes. You see, this one is damaged by blight, and this one, if I start squishing my thumb in there, there's a blight pocket in there. So these will destroy themselves in storage, and if they're stored with the rest, even a small amount of that blight ooze, get off my own fingers even, will infect and destroy the rest of the potatoes. So that's rule number one. Anything blighted like that, you just dispose of. Anything that is bruised or damaged, you just eat and you don't try to store. Now the next thing is recognize if we stack a potato on top of potato on top of potato all the way down the column of this bucket, the bottom ones are going to start to get squished and they're going to start to damage themselves where they touch. So we need a soft spongy layer in the bottom of this bucket. There's a lot of things that you can use. I like sawdust. I'll explain why here as we go along. Straw is absolutely a traditional thing to use. You could even use something like shredded newspaper, although I think that would probably get to be a bit messy by the end of the season, but experiment, try. See what you have available. Sawdust of so many different forms is so readily available. I think it's kind of the low-hanging fruit for that reason. Also, in storage, okay, this one This is a good candidate of one that you should just eat and not store. It's not blighted, it's not rotten, there's nothing wrong with it, but this exposed tissue is going to be more likely to damage and start to decay than others. So we're just going to set him aside. We'll eat him right off. That's a good one. The sawdust will draw a little bit of moisture, but it won't get wet. That's just enough. It ends up being kind of like just a perfect thing to just have enough moisture around them that they don't dry out. Just do that from humidity in the air. So just kind of be a little humid, but not wet. And that's really what you want. You want a little humid, but not wet. If water drips down in it, it'll run right through, and it will very quickly lose all of that water and go back to the humid, but not wet. So it's really good at just moderating water to just right. Now I've put these in, and notice that I'm trying to make sure that they don't really touch each other. If there's a little, like there's a couple little points where they touch a tiny bit, but not a lot, right? They're not packed in. That's the key thing. And then I'm going to cover them around with more sawdust until they're completely covered. Okay. And this is what's really important. We don't want the layers to touch, and we don't want the potatoes to touch in the layers. So you're going to end up with more sawdust than potato in this bucket till we're all done. And if you have, I know everybody's, is that, that's okay. See, there's a blight spot. Okay, found one. I know everybody is tempted to want to try and get the maximum amount of produce in the minimum amount of space when you're storing stuff. That one's okay. A little green, but he'll eat. Yeah, that was fine. But it's self-defeating in the long run. Because what good is packing all of that stuff in such a small space if it all ends up rotten at the end of the day? Okay? So pack it right. You'll have good success. Pack it wrong, and you'll stand back at the end of the season, admire your beautiful pantry, and then someday you'll go to it and you'll scream because everything in it is rotten. Okay? I've had that experience with different things going bad en masse, and it is really, really disheartening. Okay? So, especially if you're thinking you want to depend on this and have this be your nourishment for the year, it is really, really disheartening. But when we do it like this, and we pack them in nicely, we isolate them all with an absorbent medium, okay? If one of those goes bad in here, all of the juices and the badness is going to be absorbed by this lovely sawdust, and it won't have the opportunity to contact other potatoes. If one goes bad at the very beginning of the season, and that particular bucket lasts until the very end of the season, maybe it will take one or two others out. But you still haven't lost your whole bushel. Okay? You could get one more row in here, but this was just an early exploratory picking. It's not really time to pick the whole patch yet. I was just kind of experimenting, and I wanted to get this video out. So I'm not going to put any more in here, but there certainly is room in this bucket for one more layer. Yeah, straw works, but straw is not as absorbent as the shavings. Okay, so look around. These shavings are very cheap to buy, very readily available at ag stores. Go talk to local sawmills. If you say, can I get, a couple of trash bags of sawdust, I want to put some potatoes or apples or whatever in the root cellar. In all likelihood, if you're their neighbor, they'll just give you some, even if they're selling it or doing something with it. If you have a little request like that, they'll probably work with you. Bandsaw mills, there's more and more and more bandsaw mills around. Do be careful about two things. You probably don't want to do walnut because it'll flavor the food. And, so make sure there's no walnut in your sawdust. And a lot of the small homeowner scale or small business scale bandsaw mills, in the winter, they're water lubricated blades. There's a little dripper that drips water on the blade. And in the winter, they use antifreeze. And you don't want to pack your food with shavings that have antifreeze on them. But a simple question to the owner of the band mill will answer the question whether that's a problem or not, right? Talk to your neighbors, make friends, offer them a dozen apples or something in exchange for the sawdust, and you'll have a good time. Like, you'll eventually find the right person to talk to and have the right experience and get what you need. And if you don't, go buy a bag. It's fine. It's not expensive. So this is the best way to pack these things. The other way that you'll see people doing this, which is just as good as this, is trays that only hold one layer of produce. Okay? If you're going to go with straw, I recommend that you do that. Go make yourself some wooden trays that are, 4 inches tall or so. Put a layer of straw on the bottom, put your produce in so it's not touching, pack straw on top to protect it, and then stack that on top of the previous tray. That way they're isolated in different containers because straw is not as absorbent as the sawdust. So everybody I've ever talked to that was root cellaring with straw as their packing medium was using single layer trays and not doing it in buckets like this. So having the more absorbent material allows you to use buckets like this, and I like that because I use these used flower pots for like everything around the farm. These are a really wonderful resource. So I hope this gives you some ideas and some things to think about, and hopefully better success in your root cellaring endeavors. If so, I would be most grateful if you gave it a thumbs up, because the YouTube algorithm then knows that you enjoyed it and will show it to other folks. I'm always most grateful. It helps support the channel. And I hope that you will have a wonderful, blessed day, and we'll see you here next time at Old Ways Rising Farm.